Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. It is great to see you. And if you're here in the sanctuary with us, again, we ask that you wear masks while you are here together. And we do ask that after our time with Michelle tonight, that you just head outside to greet each other. It'll be a nice night, so it'll be a great opportunity to do that. And if you're joining us online, we are so thankful that you found us tonight or sometime after tonight, and we are grateful that you're going to have the opportunity to learn from Michelle with all of us who are here. My name is Tom Abbott, and I'm blessed to be one of the pastors here at First Presbyterian Church in Salida, Colorado, and I share that gift with Hillary Downs, and we are blessed to have Michelle Warren with us here tonight, who's going to help us think about how as a congregation, how as a community, we are involved in advocacy work, particularly around the issues of racism and immigration, and super excited that Michelle is going to help us with that. I got to hear Michelle speak about 4 years ago, we decided, 5 years ago. Yeah, at Whitworth University where she was speaking, and so it's been a gift to get to know her, and she was my daughter-in-law's boss for a while, so that's kind of a fun connection we've had as well when they were both working on advocacy things in the Northwest. So anyway, we're super grateful that Michelle is here. She brought some of her books with her, The Power of Proximity. If you don't have one of these and would like to snag one, she's got some copies with her, and she can help you with that. And all the proceeds go to Open Door Ministries from her books, and which is a ministry in Denver that works to get rid of homelessness. So it's a good cause. Well, if you will, help me welcome Michelle as we are here together tonight.
It's good to see you. I'm so happy to be here. I can't tell you how happy. I just want to paint a picture for you that during certain months when there's a certain political climate, it's not unusual for me to do 20 or more, usually around 20, speaking engagements a month. It's not that unusual. This is my first in-person speaking engagement for over a year. When Tom handed me the headset, I couldn't remember how to put it on. And this is the best, is I've never worn one with a mask. So I was trying to figure that out as I thought I would meet. So I just, on a personal level, it's really great to be with you all. I love meeting people. I love traveling around the country. And I just love talking about areas of growth for me and areas of growth for the church. And that's really what I want to talk about today. So it's kind of fun. So Tom and I met when I was speaking. It was 5 years ago. It'll be 5 years ago this July. And I remember going up there, and it was an opportunity for pastors to have enrichment. So there were and you had to pick a track, like you were going to be there for 5 days. And there were really amazing tracks. I was a worship leader for about over 16, 17 years. So when I noticed there's a worship track, like people could go and, sharpen their skills and be with their colleagues. And there was a preaching track. I don't remember the other ones, but I was the immigration track. And I thought, nobody's going to come. Like, really, nobody's going to want to come. There's all these wonderful offerings. This is a really hard conversation. It's really a politically divisive conversation. There's this cultural, and I emphasize cultural because I don't think it's biblical or a moral thing that we put. We have this cultural idea that politics and the church and Christians and politics don't mix. And so I thought, well, there is literally no way. Now, if you would know, July 2017, think about it. Think about what was happening July 2017. Think about what was happening November 2016, and just some of the language around immigration. And so that was another reason I was like, nobody is going to brave coming into that room. They gave us a nice small room. I don't know if you guys remember that. We got probably the smallest room, and I thought that would be appropriate. But it was packed out. It was packed out. And it was not one of those tracks that were for the faint of heart. Because not only was it a little politically, it wasn't really divisive, but it was, there could have been a politically charged element to it. There could be, just being in a small room and cramped up. And this was like all these other offerings. Am I really going to dedicate time to learn about immigration and the church? Well, there was no air conditioning either. And did I say it was July 2017? So it was not for the faint of heart. Yet Tom and several pastors and ministry families were up there, and it really was quite a time. But it was hot. I just remember us all pretty much, it was just bathed in sweat. So it's just good to be, one, not necessarily in a cramped room, but it really was just a testament to the pastor who stewards your congregation. Then when there's all these, nobody would have said, you know what, Tom, I don't know why you're going to learn how to be a better preacher. Of course, that's what preachers do. They're always trying to get better. And there was no reason to have to go except for curiosity and a willingness to step into what could be considered an uncomfortable place. And so I just want to just affirm your leadership and your willingness not only to sit without air conditioning for 5 days on the issue of immigration, but really to continue to lean in and open up the next opportunity, not just for you as an individual or for individuals, but for a collective engagement, rather. Christ says that we are the salt of the earth, that we are the light of the world. And then he goes on to give this metaphor that only foolish people would take light and cover it with a bowl. And I think right now the church, the Christian church, is having a global, but definitely a national struggle with its public witness, which basically people aren't sure if they like our version of salt and light. And those are things that we should go inward and look, because light is amazing in darkness. It casts out not just darkness, but the fear of isolation, et cetera, et cetera. And salt is pretty good. Nobody wants to eat without salt, right? And so we should be good news to a broken world. Christ says that he was the good news. He was good news to the poor. So it wasn't just for the elite, it was for everyone. And so since we are supposed to be representing his hands, his feet, his mouth, and being salt and light in the world, we need to continue to step out into new spaces. So I just want to also commend those of you who are with us, both online as well as in person, as we lean in a little bit more. So before I kind of get into my PowerPoint, I just want to tell you something. I did not mean to get political. I was a good girl. Anybody done the Enneagram? Do you guys know what I'm talking about? Okay, I'm an Enneagram 1. We do not go outside the rules. I grew up, I knew exactly what a good girl was supposed to do in the church. And so much so that I just gave my life to the Lord and was like, whatever you want me to do. And I ended up in a teaching in a very poor community. And my husband and I both wanted to do ministry in poor cities in the United States. We didn't know what that city would be. At one point it was Dallas, and we stayed there for a few years, and then it was Denver. But we just knew that we didn't want to commute. We didn't want to live one place and work and worship another place, that we wanted to be good neighbors. That's an important thing to want to be, right? Especially as a Christian. So anyway, I didn't know very much about the bigger, broader world, and living in the community and learning to not only be a good neighbor, but to receive from neighbors who look different than me, who had grown up in different environments and thought differently about me and other things in the world, was a really great opportunity to become very aware at what sometimes we call the haves and the have-nots. Sometimes it's the barriers around race, socioeconomic status, political ideology, sociology, how we're going to implement it. All of those questions began to come because I was living in a new community and they were teaching me. And that's what I talk about in my book. Proximity to the community was very powerful. So much so that when you care about your neighbors, you not only see limitations and not only hear them talk about their limitations, but you join them to reverse the circumstances that they're in. I have a lot of smart neighbors. I have a lot of engaged neighbors. I was able to join them And we had some of this shared liberation of joining with each other to change and reverse systems. Immigration was unique because people without status don't have the same freedom. And so I had to practice a little bit of that Proverbs 31, speak up for those who can't speak for themselves, for the rights of the poor and the oppressed, for the people who can't go before judges and be heard. And so immigration began to take a little bit of a turn, and so I realized I needed more skills. And so all to say that I had grown up, you don't walk into political waters, you can get really, really close, but you don't cross over. Well, this is what happens, and I don't know how many of you read my book, but I talk a lot about the Jericho Road. And I talk a lot about that half-dead, beaten-up person on the side of the road that the Levite, very good, kind of the good Christian of the day, and the priest, the good Christian Levite, the Levite, the pastor of the day, and they walked on. But it was the Samaritan who extended mercy. And what I basically have come to the conclusion is that my husband and I chose to live alongside the Jericho Road. So it's not an inconvenience to see the poor, it's a way of life. Not everyone's going to have that beautiful opportunity, and that's okay. But I share that because when you see things, you need to respond. And that's what I was doing. And I got so close, like everything I did to step into that next hard thing got me closer and closer to weighing in on political issues like immigration. And I was, realizing that this was kind of coming up with my construct, this culture, like that's not what good Christians do. And I realized, you know what? Good Christians don't have a line for how deeply they love their neighbor. You're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. That's the reason that Jesus even spun that parable about the Good Samaritan, was to show who that neighbor was. That you would go so far as to, do some really scary things, some unfamiliar things, but that you are supposed to love your neighbor as yourself. So as I was loving my neighbors and being loved by my neighbors and walking in relationship, I kept getting closer and closer to that forbidden line. And that's when I realized that love does not have barriers and bonds. Love doesn't say, I'll love you until this much. It says, I will love you until there's justice. I will love you until we have all the opportunities. And just like there was that Jericho road line for the Levite and the priest that was not going to cross over to help that half-dead, beaten-up person on the side of the road, I have to believe in my heart that the Levite and the priest were not just being disgusted. I think they thought they were probably busy. They probably thought that they needed to get somewhere faster. They didn't want to be inconvenient. There's a lot of reasons. I don't want to believe that it's just natural hatred for, people who were in need of mercy. God tells us to love mercy. But there's a lot of justifications that we have in our head to keep us from doing hard and scary things. Sometimes advocacy can feel that way. I will tell you this. I'm not a naturally brave person. I wasn't born a naturally brave person. Let me rephrase that. Because I was a terrified child. I only chose things that were safe and that would make sure that I was not going to get hurt physically, emotionally. And if you think about that spiritually, I wasn't going to get outside that box. But what I began to realize that I needed more courage. I needed to lean into the next thing. We're going to have more of a workshop type night tonight. That's why I put things on the slides. Because you're going to be sharpening your skills to say, God, how do you want me as an individual? How do you want us as a church community to lean into what might feel hard or might feel uncomfortable or might feel taboo? I don't really know what God has for you, but I will just say this. What I have learned as being a naturally fearful person is that when I stepped into the next hard thing and had to embrace courage, courage is not the absence of fear. It is living your convictions in the face of it. And so every time you lean into another hard, scary thing and you need to use courage, I will tell you this. I'm going to have to take my earrings off because I hear them knocking against it and it's driving me nuts. I'm sorry that is happening. All right, that's one. And we will be free from the little rattle. Another thing I forgot this last year, Don't wear dangly earrings. Okay. The more you practice courage, living what you believe needs to happen in the face of your own fear, and what usually is the resistance, which is the pushback of other people's fear, you know what happens? You actually become brave. When people use adjectives to describe me, I have had to embrace them because it's not what I thought I'd grow up to be, all right? Usually people say, Michelle is fierce and she's brave. Now, they say nice things too, but that usually comes right out of the bat. And I'm like, you know what? It's because I do really hard things, and I didn't do it without fear. And so I just want to, just as a personal testament, that that's the power of the Holy Spirit. I didn't do it in my own strength. I didn't do it because I thought it was a good idea. I did it because I was living a conviction that I believed in the bottom of my heart, put there by the Lord to express it in salt and light and get over myself and get over my fears and get over worrying about what other people would think and practice being courageous. That's really important, because if we're going to do a workshop on advocacy, this is not on a slide, but this is a bit of notes you need to write down, okay? If you're a note taker, don't worry, we're not in class. But if you want to, advocacy is taking your personal convictions to a public place. That's all it is. Taking your personal convictions, what you believe to be true, and making it public. Now, you could say, well, there's advocates who take those to actual people in power. Yes, that's exactly right. But when you learn to speak up, you're taking your personal convictions. That's what makes it scary. Sometimes, especially those of us who, and for me, grew up pretty privileged, I used to say things like, well, I could always advocate for somebody else, but I'm not very good at advocating for myself. That was a cultural thing I had to get over. I began to realize, and I tell so many young people like Sam and Melissa Abbott, who are, part of my world and journey and intersections, that you're actually only going to be as strong of an advocate for others as you are for yourself. You have to learn to be brave and speak up for yourself while you're practicing it. I've got so very many stories, and part of me wants to spin off to this story about the Grimke sisters and the abolitionist movement and the women's rights movement. I'll tell you a little bit. Do you know the women's rights movement actually started as the abolitionist movement? There were a couple women of faith who were being brave and decided, you know what, I'm going to go to this even though it's just for the guys. They had been working night and day on the abolitionist movement, and then it all of a sudden dawned on them when they couldn't get into this conference that, wait a second, I'm fighting for rights that I don't even own, that I don't even have. Because that's what happens when you begin to realize there's this shared liberation, that while I'm helping you, I'm actually helping me too. I'm learning how to be brave. So while that young little girl might not have known where I was going to land, I bet you she was probably, me, years and years ago, would be happy to know that I didn't allow my fear to control everything forever. All right, so we're going to take some time to talk a little bit about advocacy. And the very first slide, that's right, there's no slides up here. Well, the slide here is this big one, and it is probably one of the bigger, profound things. It's the reason I wrote the book. You can't fix a problem you don't understand. Now, that organization, Open Door Ministries, was the one that my husband and I founded together about 25 years ago. We had never been homeless. We had never been separated from our families. We had never been kicked out of school. We had never struggled with addictions. You can't fix a problem you don't understand. But you're never going to understand it from a distance. So you don't say things like, well, I don't understand that, so I stay away. It's no, I lean in. I do that next brave thing. Because I care about homelessness so much that I have it on a mask. I think that's great. But now I need to realize, okay, I need to keep leaning in. How can I join you, homeless individual, homeless community, others who are working on this collective good to move people from a place of not being able to afford basic shelter? We know that in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're not going to go very far if we don't have food and shelter and safety. So how am I going to join you? Even though I've never been homeless, well, I'm going to join you. And together, we're going to use what we can together to move toward opportunities. I often say that the well-being of others, it makes us well too. I think that's innate. That's what all what a justice is. God's heart for justice that sits at the foundation of his throne, metaphorically, of course, just shows that the very heart of God means it's not okay if just you do okay or your family. It's about the wellness of everyone. If you and your family are moving forward, that's fine. But if everybody else isn't moving forward, that's not fine. And you can't just live for yourself and figure out that you and yours is good. Justice says, you know what, I need to step back and see how we all can move forward together. If you read a bit about the Old Testament, in just even the Levitical law, God cared so much about the health of the whole. That's one of the reasons that we advocate as salt and light in the world. We know that there's brokenness. We know there needs to be restoration, and we get to join God in his redemptive work in the holistic picture, not just spiritually, but mentally and emotionally and physically. And that's why we care if people don't have the opportunity to have shelter. That's why we care that people have access to good, healthy food. That's why we care that undocumented immigrants are able to have a path to move their lives forward so they don't have to live in perpetual fear of being deported from their family after being here for 25 years, et cetera, et cetera. It's why we care. But we can't fix a problem we don't understand. And so that is why proximity is paramount. Like I said, I wrote the book because it seemed like when millennials were getting out of college, I don't even know if we called them millennials back then, but that millennial group, they kept finding us in our little hole-in-the-wall place of Open Door Ministries. And I was an advocacy director for a national organization for about 10 years, and they'd say, I want to do jobs like you. I care about injustice. They had been on missions trips. We, as the older people in the congregation, had bought their bake sales and let them wash our car, and we pushed them to see things we ourselves hadn't even seen. And so they woke up to this awareness of, oh my word, the world does not live like us. And they kept coming back to people like me saying, I want a job like yours. I want to do something with what I've seen. And so I would say the best, most radical thing you can do is become leaned in relationship with the people that you care about. And that's just number one. So I would encourage you as a congregation to make sure that you are always putting proximity and relationship for the things that you as a body begin to engage. It's so important. One, it breaks down the illusion of our wholeness. So I know in present day America, we talk a lot about white supremacy. This idea that people who are white kind of act like they're better than other people, or they think they have more because they have more money. There's an undercurrent of that's what it means to feel like you're better. There's an easy way to think that kind of like, I'm going to be the savior. I'm going to come in and help the poor, pull them up. And that seems like a really good idea, except it doesn't treat the poor with dignity. And we kind of get this idea that somehow we've avoided homelessness because of our goodness, not because of what we've been born into or some grace that God has given us. But the illusions of our own wholeness help us realize, you know what? I don't have it all together. If I had to wake up every morning at 4 a.m, get my kids, 3 kids, set of twins, ready to get out the door so we can catch the bus by 5:30 in the morning so I can drop my twins over at this childcare because that's the free childcare for the twins, and then I'm going to get on another bus, and that by 8 o'clock I'm on the other side of the city dropping off, the 4-year-old to that preschool because they don't work together because I couldn't get the stipends to work, and now I'm going to go on the bus again and go to the other place so that I can start to work for my, at this point, $15 an hour job. I'm actually talking about a friend of mine. I couldn't do that. Single mom, 3 kids, no car. Being in relationship with her and so many of my other friends, I began to see our sameness. We both wanted our kids to do well. We wanted to get up and out in the morning. We wanted to love. We wanted to be loved. We wanted to flourish. But I just thought about that drone day after day after day. Without a lot of the things that I had, I began to realize, wow, maybe I don't have it all together. Maybe I've just got a little bit, I'm not saying my life is easy, but maybe I have it a little bit easier. And maybe I need to be more humble. Proximity helps us be more humble. Well, I hope it helps us be more humble. It should. I talked a bit about how it forces us to choose courage in the face of fear. Sometimes it's scary just to go downtown. I remember that. I remember that I was taught to avoid the place I live and raised my kids. I had to actually practice. And, I remember my mom having to practice because, I gave her a grandbaby and we decided to run a transitional house for homeless teens with the baby. And we didn't have a separate apartment. So she was trying to deal with her courage, right? Some of it's supporting your kids and some of the ideas that they have, that God has sparked with them. And I just told her, I was like, Mom, familiarity breeds comfort. Just keep coming down. Just keep coming down. And that happened to me. I've watched it happen with people. So it helps us to continue to practice our fear, whether it's location or even, like I said, getting into politics, whatever it is. It shows us also how we need to work together. These are really, really big problems. While we have been waiting for you, we haven't been waiting for you, okay? We need as many hands to come together. But we're going to have to do the long work. I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we get into it. And then I said that proximity gives us the opportunity to choose hope. Hope is believing, or faith, I should say. Faith is believing in what you don't see. So year after year, March after March on immigration reform, I could get pretty cynical. My neighbors can't afford to get cynical. They have to keep marching. But I'm choosing to live in the neighborhood, choosing to take on issues that are not mine directly. And I could just say, it's never going to happen. The politics are awful. I'm just not even going to try. But the whole point of living a life by faith that we as Christians are called to do is that we're supposed to be walking towards something that we do not see. And that's what hope is. Hope is setting a vision of what can be. So when we say things like, I'm going to end homelessness in 10 years. I remember when John Hickenlooper said that as the mayor. I was like, well, I've been working ending homelessness for a long time. Good luck, buddy. I actually joined his stuff, and we worked together for a long time on issues of homelessness. But it's easy to get cynical, but no, it's to cast a vision, even some of the most unrealistic visions of what can be, because that's what the people of faith do. I believe that something different could and should be around the corner. And I'm going to live believing that should and could be. I'm going to do it by faith, because that's what people of faith do. We believe in something we can't see. We walk towards something that we can't see. And if you read the chapter in Hebrews 11, somewhere nestled, about 2/3 in, it says these people were walking and they were, kind of living in holes in the ground. And, it just sounded like they were completely, square pegs in round holes. Like, these people do not fit here. They are so unrealistic with how they're living. They were searching for something better. And then I love this part. And that's why God is not ashamed to call them his people. We hear, right? So I believe that the circumstances that my neighbors and friends are living in, that we have chosen to share together, do not have to remain as they are. And that I needed to move forward, and I still need to move forward in advocacy. But how do I, from the outside the community, join people who don't look like me, don't think like me? They are really, really aggressive, and I'm not, there's just a lot of things. So I actually am giving you some material in this PowerPoint, and you are my first audience to try it, okay? So it's been a year, but in that year, we had George Floyd's murder. And I am, like I said, I worked as an advocacy director for a national organization up until a few months ago. And so I'm always managing high-level campaigns that are moving nationally. So, we had people in Minneapolis, but there were marches all over the country, and I was working with cities and trying to coordinate. I actually couldn't march that first week, and I was a wreck. At one point, I remember jumping in my car, just driving downtown Denver, honking and like tears, crying, because I had to work so hard on coordinating stuff, I couldn't actually be in a street and march, and that's just not who I am. I usually am there. And I remember my husband saying, he could tell, He didn't even know I was doing that in the middle of the day. He just said, he's like, you are losing it because you're not there, but you need to sit here and orchestrate. You need to do this. So it took me a little bit to be able to get there, but I remember the day that I was able to go. It was a Sunday, and my son William is here. He's a freshman at the Colorado School of Mines, and he's home for the weekend. And about an hour and a half before we left, I was like, hey, you want to go to Salida with me? And he's like, sure. So, I love 19-year-olds. They're super flexible. So Will is not at Mines. He's with me. And we'll go home tomorrow. But he and I went with a friend of his from high school who's African-American, and, we did the march, and I remember looking around, I was like, whoa, I've never seen so many white people. I remember when I had a Black Lives Matter t-shirt back after 2015, and I'm going to tell you, that took, I actually was happy to do it, but I got a lot of pushback. Talk about resistance. Now, apparently, that's not such bad. You can buy them on Amazon, and like all the people who look like me were there. I was shocked. I was pleased. I was grateful. I also didn't know what to do. And I observed, and I was thrilled that they were there, but my heart began to break a little bit because I was just like, I love my people. We don't get it right all the time, but I am grateful that they wanted to join the African-American community in solidarity, and that's exactly what they should have been doing. But there were a couple subgroups that kept pushing their way to the front. White people, there were some white people, young people, older people, pushing their way to the front. I'm like, oh my goodness, you don't do that. Why are you pushing black mamas out of the way? Like, just so you can see better. This isn't your march. This isn't your march. You being able to see is not the priority. You are supposed to be in the back of the line where they have been their entire journey. And you need to learn from what a vantage point wisdom of being in the back of the line and seeing the pain of people. It is not about you. We don't center ourselves in this. And in that deep grief, I was like, I'm just going to say, I love my people, but we don't even know how to walk. We don't even know how to walk in a march around racial justice. And I was broken about it. And I ended up writing a piece that went kind of viral, and my publisher and I have been talking. And so what I'm giving you is my response to that moment. And I just signed my contract for my second book, and it's called Joining the Resistance. That's what I'm doing. I can't fix a problem I don't understand. I'm moving into proximity, but I am joining up with them. I'm joining and bringing my resources, my solidarity. But how do I do it? As salt and light. As I told you, the Christian Public Witness is having some trouble right now. We don't need any more trouble, especially when we want to do the right thing, right? And so I have it broken down. The way we join the resistance, and the reason I say the resistance is this is against the status quo. I have a degree, I have a master's in public policy, and so I'm going to tell you right now that we write public policies with the utilitarian mindset. We want to do the most amount of good for the most amount of people. We know that not everyone's going to benefit from it, and that's why we need to do little contract work. That's what a democracy is, by the way. It's a contract. We can't say, well, we're a country of these types of laws. Yes, those laws can change. If they don't work, we're allowed to change them. Changing them is a lot harder than it seems. But anyway, just to say, we have this utilitarian. So there's all of these people on the sides that the law was not written to actually accommodate. And we have to actually bring things to people in power to say, this isn't working, and you can change it with me. You don't have to, because I'm going to tell you right now, politicians, I've worked with them at every level of government for a very long time, and I'm going to tell you, they are not leaders in their community. They are waiters, waiters. They wait to see what the leaders in the community are going to do. You are the leaders in your community. That's the whole concept of a democratic republic, is the people choose the representatives, and they shape, and they shift, and they influence. And so it's only going to work if we join up and say, hey, this utilitarian mind, it worked for me, but I'm learning this whole subset it didn't work for. Property rates went so high, and living wage didn't keep up with it. There's lots. You don't actually have to even know that. You can just say, I'm upset that people are homeless and I want to do something different about it. If you know a lot, that's fine too. But I'm just saying, going to them and saying, this isn't working for everyone. And as somebody who follows Christ and loves God, and God loves justice and wants to see the well-being of everyone's flourishing, I'm not okay with that. And I don't want you to be okay with that too. That's the resistance, okay? The resistance is, this is what is working for a majority of the people, but it doesn't work for all of the people. It doesn't work for the poor. It doesn't work for the widow. It doesn't work for the immigrant. It doesn't work for the orphan. I just mentioned the 4 vulnerable people groups that are all through the Bible. God says, look after the poor. Look after the widow. Look after the orphan. Look after the immigrant. We need to make sure that we're doing that. We can't be okay. So we have to join the resistance and push back on the status quo and say, you know what? We need to make some changes. Now, this is really important when you decide to join up. The very first step to joining the resistance and getting into it is what I call serving the movement. I've already spoken to it, not in such direct terms, but that's what a life of proximity, you don't have to have my life, okay? You don't have to move to a poor community. That's not the purpose of that book. The purpose was to show the value of being in relationship with people who are broken and poor and oppressed and don't have the same opportunities as people like myself. So I've talked a little bit about serving the movement by being a neighbor, not thinking that you're better than people, trying to really learn from others. Another way that you serve the movement is, well, actually, before I get into that, it's important for us to understand that just because we recognize that Black Lives Matter, that we came into it awfully late, that they've always mattered, and that they should have mattered a lot longer ago. Sometimes when we join in a movement, we think the starting point is our starting point. And that's just arrogant. That's just uninformed. When you serve a movement, you recognize that it isn't about you and when you entered. You're just really grateful that you finally made it to the table, right? I'm just glad I get to be here. I tell a lot of people, a lot of dominant culture white people, this is not your Rosa Parks moment. You are not her in the story. It never was you. You probably don't even belong on the bus in that story. But if you do, you willingly go to the very back corner on the floor, right? Because I'm here to serve the movement. I'm here to recognize that I came too late to this table. I'm just so glad to be here. It's not about me. It's about you, and it's about the way you've been objectified, et cetera, et cetera. How can I serve? How can I join? Lila Watson is an activist. I actually am not sure if she's still alive today. She was known very well during the 70s. She was an Aborigine from Australia. She was an artist. She was growing a tremendous voice and influence, and she was invited to speak to the UN. And she was being given accolades for all of her good work. And she had been, living an oppressed life as an Aborigine and wanting liberation since she pretty much was born. And now things were beginning to open up, but people had been coming in to join her movement or to join the movement. And they came in and just thought the reason that movement hadn't taken off was because they weren't as smart as the people who had joined. So she comes before the UN and she sort of summarizes something which I actually have framed before I left CCDA. A couple of my staff who are artists put this beautiful piece of work together with this particular quote that I'm going to read to you that's on your paper. Because she said, if you've come here, don't read, sorry. I'm sorry I made you look at it because I want you to pay attention to the words. I'm a true teacher, don't pay attention yet. Okay, so if you've come here to help me, you are wasting your time. I'm going to stop there. Think about that. I moved into the city. I cared about the poor. I was teaching children whose, math skills. I was the 7th grade math teacher. I think I'm not kidding you, of the 150 kids, it was almost more than that. I think it was 157 kids that I would see in one day. Less than 10% of them knew their times tables. So I was just like, I'm helping, right? But if this is what she says, if you've come here to help me, you are wasting your time. That's hard to hear. But, she says, but if you've come because your liberation, your well-being, is bound up in mine, my liberation and well-being, then let's work together. That's just common dignity. If you're going to serve the movement, you're coming to say, you know what, I'm joining you. I'm not coming to say you're doing it wrong. And this is the reason I'm coming to give what I can give from a posture of humility. And I recognize that I need to be at this table because there's a part of me that is not well because you're not well. All right, let's work together. I think it's easy when you come into the work of the movement to feel embarrassed. I know it was for me. I'm embarrassed that I'm white. I feel ashamed. I feel uncomfortable. I hope nobody notices. Let me tell you something, friends. Everybody notices. We're all polite. We don't talk about it, but everybody notices. It took me a while to work through my own racial identity. I've had a lot of years to practice every day. I still am learning. Nobody needs any more guilty white people at the table. We don't need more arrogant ones either, but we don't need more guilty ones, okay? This is the way God made you. This is what he allowed you to be born into. And that is why you're able to serve the movement in a really effective way. You're serving. You're not leading it, you're serving it. One of the things, you need to be honest with who you are and be willing to look deeply. You have to do inside work. If you're going to do advocacy, taking your personal convictions to a public place, if you're going to do activist-type actions, and there's a lot of fun things that you can do to tell the story and share your convictions that even go beyond marching. Excuse me. I'm trying to find the microphone. That did not help. I think I made it louder. Okay, well, forget about that. All right. You need to actually make sure that you are not paralyzed by who you are. You need to do the deep inside work, but you don't do the work until you're done. You do the work while you're doing the work. Okay? That's part of practicing courage over fear. I'm afraid. I'm afraid as a white person to walk into an all people of color for Black Lives Matter movement. I hope they don't get the wrong impression. You know, I'm going to tell you, I usually am the only white person in the room and have been for a very long time. I'm thrilled more people are coming in. That's why I want us to get the message. We're allowed to come in. But it's the way we come in. And so that's why service to the movement. But we have to keep doing our own individual work because there's a lot of toxic tears. I don't know if anybody's heard about this. This has actually been a phrase that's been coined in the last few years, is this idea that it's usually white women toxic tears. That's a phrase. I don't know if you know that, but that's actually a phrase out there with people of color. They're like, I'm tired of seeing white women crying. I'm not saying that white men aren't crying. Maybe you guys should join us. But the whole point isn't that we shouldn't be broken. It's just that sometimes, I heard my daughter, she was, there's a lot of bullying that goes on. I remember she's like, so-and-so's bullying me. And I know that they were, but I'm like, well, what are you doing? Because usually, it's very unusual that it's not, it's not both. Not to say that there aren't other situations, but I just remember telling her, she was sharing some story after story. Well, Alasia, she just cries and everybody feels bad for her. And I'm like, that's because criers win. Let's think about it. That's not always true. I think grief is good. But I'm just like, if you think about it, I'm in this group. I've decided I'm coming to serve the movement. I feel so guilty and ashamed that I'm white and white people are like this. And I've decided to just burst out in tears. You probably can get away with that about once. The point is you're not there to make it about you. Listen, true lament does require tears. That's what I'm saying. Let's do that work somewhere else, okay? People that are working in the movement, even if it's just it's homeless people, like, listen, I'm the one who's homeless. I'm glad that you're feeling sad, but this meeting isn't about you feeling guilty. However, I'm just going to tell you, you have to do the inner work while you're doing the work. Just don't make the vulnerable people that you're working alongside shift all the attention to you. That's not how you serve the movement. That's how you center yourself in the movement. And this is not about you. This is not about me. I think I'm going to go ahead and just go to, this is something that's really important. Injustice is huge. Poverty, disease, huge. We haven't overcome it. That doesn't mean we shouldn't be working at it. One of the things I've noticed for those people like myself from a culture like mine, I like to be able to check things off on a list. That's how I was taught. Actually, I don't make lists anymore, but before it might check things off. I'm going to tell you right now, justice is not a to-do list. I mean, you can make a to-do list about it, but it will never stop. Because injustice, and it's hard to get that mindset. So sometimes we see this really big issue of poverty, and while there are political wins that you say, well, I'm going to hit this part of some type of bill, or we're going to make people aware there, it's easy for us to just say, that's just too big. And so we come into the movement, and all of a sudden, again, we're there to serve it. If the movement wants to do something big, we're not there to be naysayers. We have to fight and resist everything that's coming through our lens. Because when you join the resistance, when you start advocating and activating yourself in this full body movement that's been going on, nobody wants a naysayer. We're casting a vision of what can be. We already know it doesn't work. We already know we're going to lose. That's why we're marching. We've decided we don't want to lose anymore. We want to keep fighting. And I'm using marching because a lot of people marched this last spring. There are so many ways to bring personal conviction to a public place. And so I'm going to say resist the fight to make things very simple. We're there to join the resistance. I'll join your big dream. Of course I'll join your big dream. I want to see your big dream too. I don't have to steal your hope. I remember I was at what time? I have about 10 minutes? 10, 15? I don't even know what time we started, friend. About 10 or 15 minutes? Okay, I'll take 15. I just have to, part of it is I have 1,001 stories. All I want to do is tell stories. I don't actually want to teach anything. I just want to tell you stories. So I was at the border, and I was feeling very cynical. I mean, I struggle sometimes, obviously. I don't always have joy, and I need to let the Holy Spirit, help me grow some deeper roots so I can experience that joy. But I remember it was right after the Migrant Protected MPP, the protocols where the borders were now shut, and people could not request asylum. And I happened to be there during the Advent season, and I wish I could spin that conversation and that story a little bit more, but I don't have time. I was holding this brand new baby. The baby had been born while the mom was walking. She left when she was 5 months pregnant. She gave birth 2 months prematurely at 7 months, and the caravan kept going, but she was stuck there with her husband, her 2-year-old and her 4-year-old, and this little baby. And so I had heard their harrowing journey, and I'm holding this baby, and the husband and my son, my Spanish is not as good as my kids. And so, my son is kind of translating, my other son, not William, but was translating between, and I'm holding this baby, and I have a smile on my face because he is so excited. He's so excited. First of all, he's trying to tell me, please tell Mr. Trump I'm not that bad. Tell him I work hard. I mean, that's what they think we all have personal relationships and that we could fix this really quick. So I'm holding this baby, and I'm a little upset at Mr. Trump at the time, too. And I'm looking down at this child, and I'm trying to smile because he is so happy to be talking to me. And he says to me, I'm number 1,672 on the list. And I thought, our borders can manage 800 people to process every single day. We shut this down months ago. Nobody should be 1,672 to actually get to the border and ask, is it my day? Can I seek asylum today? So he'd been living in a camp with his child, his brand new premature baby, and his 2-year-old and his 4-year-old. And I was so upset. But I heard the voice of one of my mentees, Jenny Madrano, Mexican-American young lady from Illinois, Chicago. She had been working alongside me for a long time, and she said to me, Michelle, you never steal anyone's hope. Now, in my head, they're never going to let you in. I wanted to just fall on the floor and cry. I'd held 8-week babies before. I had given birth to a few of them. This child was being brought into the world. It was like a modern Mary and Joseph. It was right before Christmas, and I really was so angry. And all I wanted to say is, they'll never let you in. Even if you get to number one, they're not going to value. I was desperate. But I heard my sweet friend, who I have joined the movement, and I learn alongside my friends, even when they're 30, 40 years younger than me, and sometimes they are. I'm never going to steal their hope. I'm not going to say, you can't try for that. Let's try to see if we can get you to Canada. That's not my job. My job is to serve the movement, to follow the dreams, and be a part of it. So that goes to the next part, whereas stay at the table. I'm not going to go through all the points because I've told probably too many stories, but I just want to say that when you're at the table, you are going to have to hear things that are going to hurt your feelings. They talk about fragility, right? Sometimes it's called white fragility. Well, that kind of bothers me. That kind of hurts me. I understand. You know what? It's hard to hear hurtful things. Stay anyway. All right? Stay at the table. You're going to have to work with people, because you join their movement, by the way, that you may not always agree with. Stay anyway. Right now, I'm hearing a lot of narrative. Well, I like Black Lives Matter. By the way, 3 years ago, nobody did. But I think Black Lives Matter is great. I just don't approve of the movement. Well, you obviously don't understand. Stay anyway. You can't, it's not your movement. If you're going to join the resistance, if you've recognized a problem, you're going to sit at the table, you're going to stay at the table, and it is not up to you to parse what you are and are not going to think is real. Now, you don't have to do everything that the table wants you to do, but please, this is why you're there, to grow, to be stretched, to hear how you're being perceived. Right now, I'm working on this national coalition. I was given basically a fellowship from the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute to steward this collective of women and advocacy and activism nationally, to see if we can kind of rise up and be some type of voice. Well, we're there, but can we come together? So I was asking my friend who's African-American, and I mean, I know African-Americans usually don't want to sit with white people, white women like me. I mean, we're friends, but, there's just a lot of, but it's taken a while, and I said to her, I know it's really hard to think about this. I know women of color are not really wanting to move into space to include people, women that are white. And she said, well, I pretty much have decided that's done. I thought, well, why? She said, well, if we don't get them at the table, all I know is they're voting against us every time. I got to understand why. So I'm just saying there are things we have to learn to sit at the table so we can reason and hear each other. And I'm talking about Christian women. We have to be willing to stay at the table. We're not at the table so that I can say, oh, good, I have a few black friends and I'm at the table, I must not be the problem. That is not the reason you're at the table, okay? This is not some private club that they've let you in. This is the table that you are there to learn, to stretch, to grow, and then to leverage what you have. That's the reason you're there. You actually have an understanding and access to a system that people who are marginalized don't have. And that is the work you never resist. That's why you're there, is to do that work, to leverage your privilege and help your people. It was a real big bummer of a work when I was sitting there at this interfaith table once again, and I looked around again, and I'm like, man, people who are from my faith background are not here. Everybody else is here, but and I realized my job isn't just to sit here and be the voice for that. My job is to get going and grow the voice for that. We talk a lot about indigenous people. We talk about it in missions work. Our desire is that indigenous people would come from, the communities that we're in. We talk about that in, the work that I do. People from the community are the ones who are supposed to be leading the transitional house. People who were formerly homeless. The longer you do it, the more you see that. And it's great work. But I think after a while, I was just like, man, I'm never going to be indigenous to my immigrant community. I'm an immigrant story, but it's a couple generations ago, and while I'm very connected to it, that doesn't mean I understand what it means to be an immigrant. I'm never going to be, black or brown. This is who I was born to be. Kind of struggling with a little bit of that guilt, right? And so the question is, why am I even here? And that's when I realized, Michelle, you're indigenous somewhere. That's your job. There are people who will listen to you. They don't like what you're going to say, and I have learned that. People don't necessarily like what I have to say. But they can't get me out of their head because I look just like them. I grew up in the same schools, great same neighborhoods. I know the culture. I mean, I've been there for about 25 years full time, but that doesn't mean I never lost my native tongue. I am indigenous somewhere. And I need to leverage that, understanding. And I need to bring the stories and my relationships to help my people, honestly, not be afraid. That's the reason I love my people. They are doing what they think is right, and there's fear of, people who don't look like them, I get that. And you know what? The brain is actually wired in a way that it's supposed to protect you from things that scare you. You've got this amygdala. By the way, is there anybody that's a psychologist in this room? Oh, good. I can probably get away with more. I have a degree in math and public policy. So I will say this. Psychologists have explained this to me. But in the back of the brain, the amygdala, that is where you have fight and flight. So immigrants are coming in hundreds of thousands. They're going to take our jobs. I'm afraid. Okay. People are breaking into my house right now. Be afraid. That's the way the brain's supposed to work. When you don't understand what's going on, it's this fight or flight mechanism that can get out of control. And do you know the only thing that will calm down the amygdala? It's the back of the brain freaking out. The only thing that will calm it down is the frontal lobe. It's where executive function is. It's where we take all that irrational, or sometimes it is rational, and we take that fear and we put it through the executive, function of the frontal lobe, and we're like, wait a second, I don't have to be afraid because of this, because this, because of this. Now, the reason I bring that up is because I realized my neighbors and friends didn't really know very many immigrants, and they didn't understand. That's what, Tom sat there for 5 days and watched slide after slide after slide. I did hear that he brought that and taught it. I'm thrilled. All of the different, they're not stealing your jobs. They're not paying taxes. Once I have information, oh, that's helpful. Then I can calm down and I can actually share that information. And keep in mind, I'm encouraging not to do anything without leaning into relationships. So not only am I talking about the issue of poor access to education, I'm talking about the kids that I'm volunteering in the school with and their families and how I'm getting to know them. So my executive function can be personal relationships. Like, I know immigrants. I don't have to be afraid of them. These are people that I've met. These are people that I've known. Oh, and I have some facts. Well, that also is not privileged information for you to keep to yourself, right? Advocacy is taking what you personally know, believe, learn, and putting it in a more public place. We have to help our people. We have to help them realize that it's not about politics, it's about people. It's about learning things. All right, so let me see. In my there are some things I do want to say. It's very easy for you to become the expert on immigration, or you're the person who cares about the poor, or it's very disrespectful. People say, oh, you're doing your homeless thing. That feels hurtful. But, people don't always know what to do with that kind of thing. And I think what is really important is you want to make sure that you're always redirecting people's learning to people who are closest to the pain. The people who are closest to the pain should be the voices that we're listening to. It's ironic because that book, I had been told to write a book forever, and I probably should have done it earlier, but I didn't know how to write it in a way that didn't paint me as some savior and guilt. I really wanted to make sure that I had my words so that I didn't give a lack of honor and dignity to my neighbors who honestly had taught me so many things. I didn't know about this kind of stuff. And so it's very easy to kind of become the leader of your people on these issues. That's not so bad, except it really shouldn't stop there. You need to say, yeah, I'll help you. Come join me in that journey. Come join me as I learn and listen to the leaders I'm learning from. We're always pointing people back to the ones who are closest to the pain, to the ones who are leading, and we are joining, making sure that while we're helping encourage and lead, we are never trying to become the leader. I think I will probably end there because we're at about an hour. And tomorrow I'll be back, and I won't be talking necessarily about advocacy, but I will be talking about how we see people and what we do with what we see. Because I think that's really, really important. I started tonight by saying we can't fix a problem we don't understand, but the last part was, and we can't understand it from a distance. So problems, societal problems, shouldn't live out there as these public policy ideas. They're actually impacting people. We need to get to know the people. We need to learn and understand and join in a collective to move what should be, not what we see. We don't need faith for that, but what we should be. I'll end with this story. I used to teach. Well, actually, I teach all the time. Who am I kidding? But I was leading this one group of interns, and I would always take the interns through this one particular passage. And we talked a lot about agape love. And I remember, for some reason, I just threw it out there one morning when we were meeting. I was just like, so why do you think love is the greatest of these? So go back to 1 Corinthians 13. It's very often read, especially in weddings. Now abide faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love, right? I was like, why? I mean, I was just asking a question because it was that's sort of my personality. I had not even really thought about it myself. And so it was a long time ago. And somebody came back with, I think that's because someday we're not going to need any faith or hope. You know, we can risk everything by believing in something that we don't see. Believing and setting a vision of what can be. Someday we're never going to even need those two skills because all of our motivation is actually supposed to be love. We believe in something bigger than we see, and we fix our eyes on it, and we keep walking and walking and walking and working and working and working, even though the naysayers say that poverty is never going to be eradicated. Homelessness will never be reversed. Immigrants will never be welcomed. I'm going to keep walking, I'm going to keep believing, I'm going to keep fighting, I'm going to keep walking, I'm going to keep believing, I'm going to keep fighting, I'm going to keep working. And love is my motivation, right? Because God's heart is for the poor. God's heart is for the flourishing of all people. My wellness is linked to your wellness. And if you're not well, we aren't well. And we need to love each other. So we need to use that faith and hope right now so that we can set a course and a vision forward. And someday, when it's time to retire, we don't need any faith. Everything that we want to see will be right before us. We won't need to have hope. God will open our eyes and give us the freedom and the restoration. But we never, ever, ever have to be apart from what motivates us. The love of God, right? So I think I'm going to end. I didn't cover every point or even the pictures, but I think I'm going to end. Oh, questions. Oh, I'm sorry. I'd be happy to answer them. That's right. You know, he said I had 15 minutes. I want to leave you out early because I think people get hungry and tired of listening. But yes, does anybody have any questions? I'm sorry. Comments, statements, observations? It doesn't have to be a question. We're on a journey together.
Michelle, as you said, sometimes the problems seem overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they just seem overwhelming. And so, like many, I remember my mother used to say that, well, it's just so overwhelming, I don't know where to start, so I don't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always the issue, I think, with me especially. How do I, I live here in Canyon City, which is not, Canyon City is not an affluent community. We have areas, but our area is a pretty middle class, farming community. And light farming community, our whole town is very light. And so I feel helpless sometimes about what to do at this point in my life.
Yeah. Well, again, we're not going to solve the problems, but that doesn't mean we're not going to get a little bit what I like to call a more proximate justice, right? Martin Luther King Jr. talks about that the moral arc of the universe is long, and it bends. it bends toward justice. What I would say is our heart is supposed to break for the bigness of the pain, and that's why we have to do the inward work. I happen to live in a place where I see very overt brokenness all the time, and I know that that is different. And I know that that's not the case for everybody, but that doesn't mean we don't see things on the news. It doesn't mean that our church doesn't, help open our eyes to things. And that's why we have to do that deep internal work, that vulnerable work of God. It is really, really big. And I don't know if I want to join you in the bigness because I'm afraid I'm going to shut down. But here's the thing, is if you don't know, I really think prayer and discerning and not just doing it individually, but as a body is a really important way to start. Not because you're going to choose your issue, but you're going to say, God, there are so many things. Where do you want me to join? What would you like me to do? And no matter, even if it's, just one particular population or, one area, I don't really know. I mean, it might seem like small, like it's going to be third grade boys in this school. No matter how close you get to the pain, it will always feel huge and unfixable. So we could say, sin, injustice, oppression, we can keep going, racism, sexism, and then you're getting to now poor communities. Now we're getting into different subgroups. Okay, I'm going to take this really small thing so that I can feel I'm making an impact. That's what I'm going to warn you against, in the sense that even when you are going to be doing, it's never a little work, even if it's just with a small subset of the greater picture. But I do think that you are joining God in his work, and that's why there has to be that individual and collective prayer. It may be, nobody does this, Michelle, I'm serious, like this is so radical, I would never do this, nobody in my family has, I don't even know what to say, so I'm just going to pray and see if God will give me. That's a fine place to start. But it should never stay in your own heart. Then you start talking to family and friends. I really feel like, God, what? That's nuts. Trust me. My parents and Dave's parents weren't thrilled we were going to move in this. I mean, there's a lot of conversations. You got to bring people with you, because I'm bringing my forming personal convictions. I'm practicing my words out. I'm becoming brave, and people are going to be, I've tried stuff like that. It never works. You know what? I have to be faithful to being salt and light in the world, and this is what God has put on my heart. Would you like to start praying with me? Would you like to join me? We have to realize that it is a big problem. We never even see the problem for how big as it is. Our heart doesn't even have the capacity to break for it all, but God does, and we join God. That's really the joining, right? Joining God in the way he sees the world. And allow ourselves to sit in the grief of that, but not be paralyzed by it. And I think that's where, for me, growing up, I actually didn't need a lot of faith. I mean, I needed short faith until it all worked out anyway, right? There's sometimes health stuff, but for the most part, eventually I was gonna, I didn't know what it meant to be starving. I didn't know what it meant to not, know where, I was gonna sleep. I'm not saying that everything's always been easy, but for the most part, I didn't need a lot of faith. I had a lot of skills. I was in a community that could help me. And so I would just say that when we do this kind of work that's outside our comfort zone, this is the work of faith. This is long kingdom justice work that is not about seeing results, but just trusting that God is filling our hearts with his heart for others and just pouring it out publicly. Because people need to know that this is what Christians do. Now listen, I didn't say one line, which is really important when we help our people. And this is just sort of a line that I've been coined and phrased this last year. Your wokeness, everyone's talking about wokeness. Does anybody know? Has it made it out to Salida? Okay, all right. Your wokeness is not an opportunity to perform. I am very tired as a person who is in this line of work. People kind of like, well, I'm woke. And I'm like, do you even know what woke means? It was a word for African Americans to speak to other African Americans so they would not be anesthetized to the lack of opportunities. And we are going to co-opt their language and use it for our own self-gratification? Where have I heard that before? It's not an opportunity to perform. If anything, it should make us grieve. I will tell you this. I don't think it's a mistake that one of the most prolific miracles that Jesus did and was recorded in the Gospels was recovery of sight from blindness. And that we even hear from the prophets that he's going to come to help give sight. We need to pray We're blind. We need to pray that God would enable us to see. Not so we can lord it over people, because we can truly grieve. Because seeing things with the way God sees things will break your heart. But that is, like I said, that's when you join him. And that's faith and hope work. That's hard work, but it's totally the work of the church. I don't know if that helps answer, but it's a long journey. I don't think it's like, well, this month I'm going to decide I'm going to work on it, and next year, I'll just give a year to it. God, what do you want me to join? Pastor Tom, what are we going to join? We don't want to further, this is my biggest fear. God, please don't make it worse by my presence. Don't make my presence and my involvement add to the pain of other people. But we actually need to take those brave steps and learn how to walk so we don't hurt each other. And that just comes from a lot of vulnerability and checking in.
We probably need to quit.
I'm going to be here between, I think this is important. So I'm doing between the sermons. I'm going to be around for like an author meetup. And if you want to talk, come. That's good. That's a good informal time.
Yeah. So Michelle will be between the services in here to gab with whoever wants to tomorrow. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Thanks if you joined us online. If you can be with us for worship tomorrow, we would love to have you join us at 11. Have a blessed rest of the night.